Their daughter vanished without a trace at what should have been a day of celebration and joy. 25 years of agony, searching, and fading hope followed until an impossible discovery on a school website brought their world crashing to a halt. The face they'd never forgotten stared back at them from a computer screen, opening a mystery deeper than they could have imagined. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to the channel and comment where you're watching from. Within minutes of Margaret and Daniel Granger's frantic call, police cruisers flooded the quiet suburban street outside Columbus. Officers moved with practiced efficiency, establishing a perimeter around the neighborhood while Detective Harris took initial statements from the shell-shocked parents. Margaret Granger clutched her daughter's abandoned party favor, her voice breaking as she described 8-year-old Emily's sky-blue dress and the moment she vanished. "She was just there by the gate," Margaret whispered, pointing with trembling fingers. "I looked away for just a second." The initial canvas revealed troubling fragments. Mrs. Peterson from across the street mentioned a white station wagon that had been idling at the corner for nearly 20 minutes before suddenly driving away. Another neighbor thought she heard a child cry out, but couldn't be certain amid the party noise. Party guests offered hurried, contradictory accounts. Some recalled seeing Emily heading toward the woods. Others insisted she'd been playing near the swings just moments before the alarm was raised. As night fell, search teams fanned out through the neighborhood. Flashlight beams crisscrossed the nearby woods as volunteers called Emily's name, their voices echoing through empty lots and dense thickets. K-9 units sniffed at the ground, trying to pick up her scent, while officers methodically checked every shed, garage, and crawl space within a mile radius. By dawn, there was still no trace of the vibrant little girl. The Grangers' home transformed overnight into an impromptu command center. The kitchen table disappeared beneath maps and volunteer sign-up sheets. Daniel paced the living room, making calls to family members, while Margaret sat motionless on the sofa, staring at the telephone as if willing it to ring with good news. Photocopied flyers bearing Emily's smiling face appeared on telephone poles and store windows throughout Columbus. Local news crews arrived first, followed by national networks as the story of the birthday party disappearance captured the country's attention. The Grangers made tearful pleas on camera, begging for information about their daughter's whereabouts. Tips flooded in. A girl resembling Emily spotted at a gas station 30 miles away. A suspicious man seen talking to children in a neighboring county. A blue car, not white, parked near the party. Police investigated each lead, but one by one, they evaporated into disappointment. As days stretched into weeks, the command center grew quieter. Volunteer numbers dwindled. The constant ringing of phones slowed to occasional calls. Margaret still jumped whenever the telephone rang, but the spark of immediate hope had dimmed in her eyes, replaced by the dull glaze of exhaustion and fear. Daniel threw himself into organizing search parties, his determination masking the growing desperation they both felt. Emily Granger had vanished without a trace, leaving behind only questions and a family's shattered peace. 3 days into the search, a crucial piece of information emerged that momentarily altered the direction of the investigation. Emily Granger's cousin tearfully admitted to police that Emily had been involved in a heated argument with another girl at the party shortly before her disappearance. The revelation sent detectives scrambling to explore a new possibility. Had the 8-year-old simply run away in a fit of childish anger? "She was really upset," the cousin explained, her voice barely audible in the interview room. They were fighting over who would get the first piece of cake. Detective Harris, the lead investigator, immediately pivoted the investigation to pursue this angle. Officers returned to the neighborhood, methodically interviewing every child who had attended the birthday celebration. The questioning was gentle but thorough, with investigators carefully asking whether anyone had heard Emily mention leaving or if she had shared a secret hiding place with friends. Margaret Granger watched these developments with growing anxiety. "Emily wouldn't just run away," she insisted to Daniel one evening, her hands trembling as she folded laundry that included her daughter's untouched pajamas. "She knows we'd be worried sick." Her husband nodded silently, his stoic exterior masking the turmoil within. The strain was already beginning to show in their relationship, with Daniel retreating further into his work as the days passed. The evidence supporting the runaway theory remained frustratingly thin. Emily's bedroom stood frozen in time, her favorite stuffed animals arranged precisely on her bed, her toothbrush dry in the bathroom, and her small backpack still hanging on its designated hook. Not a single belonging appeared to be missing. "Children who plan to run away typically take something with them," explained a child psychologist brought in to consult on the case. "A favorite toy, a change of clothes, sometimes food. There's no indication Emily prepared to leave." More troubling was the complete absence of sightings beyond that brief moment near the gate. Despite dozens of interviews, no one could recall seeing the little girl walking away from the party or along any of the neighborhood streets. It was as if she had simply vanished into thin air after turning that corner. The investigation found itself at a crossroads, with evidence pointing in contradictory directions. The argument suggested a potential runaway situation, while the lack of preparations or subsequent sightings strongly indicated something more sinister. Officers continued to pursue both possibilities, but privately, many had begun to fear the worst. "We're looking at all angles," Detective Harris told reporters during a brief press conference outside the Granger home, "but we need the public's help. Someone saw something that day. We just need them to come forward. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to the channel and comment where you're watching from." The search for Emily Granger intensified as dawn broke over the Columbus suburb. Volunteers gathered at the Granger family home, their faces etched with determination, despite the exhaustion of a sleepless night. Margaret Granger stood on the porch, clutching a photo of her daughter, her eyes red-rimmed but resolute as she thanked each person who arrived to help. "We'll find her," Daniel whispered, placing a hand on his wife's shoulder, though his voice betrayed the doubt that had begun to creep in. Police organized the volunteers into teams, assigning each group a section of the surrounding area. The woods behind the neighborhood became the focal point, a sprawling patch of wilderness where children often played despite parents' warnings about staying close to home. By midday, the summer heat had become oppressive. Sweat-soaked searchers called Emily's name until their voices grew hoarse, the sound echoing through the trees without response. Search dogs sniffed at the ground, occasionally perking up before losing the scent again in the humid air. It was 3 in the afternoon when a volunteer shouted from deep within the woods. Officers rushed to the location, pushing through dense undergrowth. There, tied to a stick and partially deflated, hung a blue balloon, identical to those that had decorated the birthday party the evening before. "It's one of ours," confirmed the party host when shown a photograph. "We had dozens just like it." Forensic technicians carefully documented the scene, photographing the balloon from every angle. What troubled investigators most was the pristine condition of the surrounding area. No footprints, no broken twigs, no sign that anyone had passed through recently. "Could the wind have carried it here?" asked a young officer. The detective in charge shook his head. "Not tied to a stick like that. Someone placed it deliberately. The balloon was bagged as evidence and sent to the lab, though everyone knew it would likely yield nothing. Without fingerprints or DNA, it remained just another puzzling piece in an increasingly confusing case. As news of the discovery spread, theories multiplied. Some believed Emily had left it as a marker, perhaps playing a game that had gone terribly wrong. Others whispered darker possibilities, that someone had placed it there to mislead searchers, or worse, as some kind of trophy. Margaret clung to hope, insisting that the balloon meant Emily was alive, leaving breadcrumbs to be found. Daniel remained silent, his jaw clenched as he stared at the woods that had swallowed their daughter's trail. By the end of the week, the search had expanded and contracted again. The balloon yielded no useful evidence. Media vans that had crowded the street began to disappear one by one. Summer crept toward its end, and with it, the intensity of public interest waned, leaving the Grangers alone with their unanswered questions and the haunting image of a child's balloon tied to a stick in the empty woods. Search teams combed the nearby woods, eyes scanning every thicket and hollow for a clue. The July heat was oppressive as volunteers pushed through dense undergrowth, calling Emily Granger's name until their voices grew hoarse. Local police officers led the effort, organizing the searchers into methodical grids that expanded outward from the party location. On the second day, when hope was beginning to waver, a volunteer spotted something colorful among the trees. After hours of searching, they found a balloon tied to a stick deep among the trees, identical to those at the party but with no footprints or disturbances in the soft earth around it. The red balloon, now partially deflated, swayed gently in the breeze, a silent sentinel in the otherwise undisturbed forest. Margaret rushed to the scene when she heard about the discovery, her heart pounding with both hope and dread. Daniel followed closely behind, his normally composed face etched with worry. They stood together, staring at the balloon as if it might speak to them, might tell them where their daughter had gone. "Could she have left it as a marker?" Margaret whispered, her voice breaking. The lead detective shook his head. "We can't be certain. There's no evidence of anyone walking through here recently." The discovery raised more questions than it answered. Was it a breadcrumb left by Emily, or a cruel coincidence? Perhaps it had simply drifted from the party, carried by the wind. Or worse, Had someone placed it there deliberately to mislead the search? Investigators cataloged the balloon as evidence, sealing it carefully in a plastic bag. They expanded the search area, bringing in dogs to track any scent that might linger. But the animals circled aimlessly, unable to pick up a trail. The forest held its secrets tightly. As days passed, the balloon became another piece in the growing puzzle of Emily's disappearance. News crews filmed the woods, their cameras panning across the spot where it had been found, but public interest began to wane as summer faded into autumn with no further developments. The Grangers returned home each night to a house that felt increasingly empty. They would sit at their kitchen table reviewing maps of the search areas, wondering if they had missed something, if their daughter was still out there somewhere waiting to be found. "We'll find her," Daniel would say, though his voice carried less conviction with each passing day. But the trail grew colder. The white station wagon reported near the party was never located. The balloon, once a promising lead, became just another dead end in a case that seemed determined to remain unsolved. 5 years passed with excruciating slowness. The Granger family home, once filled with Emily's laughter, had become a shrine to absence. Margaret Granger moved through her days mechanically, clinging to routines that kept her functioning, while the investigation into her daughter's disappearance grew increasingly dormant. On a crisp autumn morning in 2003, Margaret found herself sitting in a church basement surrounded by strangers who understood her pain without explanation. The support group for families of missing children had been her therapist's suggestion, one she'd resisted for years until the isolation became unbearable. "My son was taken from a mall," a hollow-eyed woman shared. "Security cameras caught nothing. 7 years now." Margaret listened, recognizing her own story in different settings. Children vanishing from places meant to be safe. Families suspended in grief's purgatory. The group leader, a social worker whose own brother had disappeared decades earlier, spoke of ambiguous loss, the particular torture of not knowing. After the meeting, a quiet woman with graying hair approached Margaret. "I'm Patricia," she said. "My daughter, Lily, disappeared from a church picnic in '97, just outside Dayton." The details sent a chill through Margaret's spine. A child gone in minutes, a white vehicle reported nearby, search teams finding nothing but a hair ribbon in nearby woods. The parallels were too striking to ignore. "Did they ever find who was responsible?" Margaret asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Patricia shook her head. "The detective said there wasn't enough evidence. He retired shortly after taking our case." At home that evening, Margaret mentioned the coincidence to Daniel. Her husband looked up briefly from his newspaper, his face a mask of controlled emotion. "Different detective than ours," he said flatly, retreating behind the printed pages. Their marriage had become a hollow exercise in coexistence. Daniel buried himself in work, accepting every business trip offered, while Margaret maintained Emily's room exactly as it had been, clothes folded in drawers, stuffed animals arranged on the bed, waiting for a return that seemed increasingly unlikely. The police still had Emily's file open, but calls grew less frequent. The white station wagon was never identified. The neighbor who thought she heard a child cry that night had since moved away. The balloon found in the woods remained an unexplained anomaly in the evidence locker. Margaret kept a calendar where she marked each day since Emily vanished, 1,825 tiny X's, each one a testament to her refusal to surrender hope. She placed fresh flowers beside Emily's, photograph every Sunday, whispering updates about the week as if her daughter might somehow hear. "I'll find you," she promised, touching the frame gently. "No matter how long it takes." 5 years passed with agonizing slowness. The Granger family home, once filled with search parties and police officers, had grown quiet. The investigation into Emily Granger's disappearance had cooled, relegated to a dusty file in the Columbus Police Department's archives. Margaret Granger, desperate for any connection to families who might understand her pain, joined a support group for parents of missing children. The church basement where they met each Thursday evening became her sanctuary. There, under fluorescent lights that cast everyone in a pallid glow, Margaret listened to stories that mirrored her own, children vanishing from parks, schools, and family gatherings, leaving behind only questions. "Some days I wake up and, for a split second, I forget," a father from Cincinnati confessed one evening, his voice breaking. "Then it all comes rushing back." Margaret nodded, understanding the cruel rhythm of grief and hope that had become her daily companion. Through these shared experiences, she formed a bond with Janet Wilcox, a mother from a neighboring county whose daughter Lily had disappeared from a church picnic just 14 months before Emily vanished. "The similarities are uncanny," Janet whispered to Margaret after one meeting. Lily was 7. She was wearing her favorite yellow dress. One minute she was playing with other children, the next, gone. The parallels unsettled Margaret deeply. Both girls had disappeared during community gatherings, both within a 50-mile radius, both without witnesses or evidence. When Janet mentioned the detective assigned to her case, a man named Harrington, Margaret felt a chill. Harrington handled Emily's case too, she said, her voice barely audible. Over coffee the following week, the two mothers compared notes. Detective Harrington had led both investigations initially, showing great interest and compassion, but in both cases his involvement had tapered off unexpectedly. Margaret learned that shortly after Emily's disappearance, Harrington had retired abruptly, citing personal reasons. "Did you ever feel like he was holding something back?" Janet asked, stirring her coffee absently. Margaret couldn't shake the feeling that these cases were connected somehow, not just by circumstance, but by something more sinister. She returned home that evening to find Daniel watching television, his face illuminated by the screen's blue glow. The distance between them had grown over the years, their shared grief becoming a silent wedge rather than a bond. "I think there's something we missed," Margaret said, but Daniel only nodded, his eyes never leaving the screen. That night, Margaret lay awake, staring at the ceiling. The support group had given her something the police couldn't: a pattern, a connection, a thread to follow. For the first time in years, she felt a flicker of purpose ignite within her. She would not let Emily's case die in a forgotten file. She would find the truth, no matter how long it took. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to the channel and comment where you're watching from. The Granger household had become a museum of grief, its rooms filled with the ghosts of what should have been. As the 10th anniversary of Emily's disappearance approached, Margaret and Daniel Granger found themselves living parallel lives under the same roof, connected only by the invisible thread of their missing daughter. Daniel threw himself into his career with almost manic dedication. His position as a regional sales manager required frequent travel, a blessing in disguise that allowed him to escape the suffocating weight of their empty home. In hotel rooms across the country, he could briefly pretend to be someone else, a successful businessman without a tragic past. Yet each return home brought the crushing reality back into focus, his daughter's untouched bedroom, a monument to their ongoing nightmare. Margaret, meanwhile, constructed her days around rigid routines that kept despair at bay. Each morning began with baking bread, kneading the dough with the same determination that had once fueled her search for Emily. Afternoons were devoted to tending her garden, where she spoke softly to the plants as if they were confidants. Tuesdays and Thursdays found her volunteering at the local church, organizing food drives and clothing donations with meticulous care. These activities weren't merely hobbies, they were lifelines in an ocean of uncertainty. "I need to keep busy," she would tell concerned friends. "When my hands are still, my mind wanders to places I can't bear to go." On what would have been Emily's 18th birthday, the Grangers organized a small candlelight vigil in their backyard, the same space where their daughter had last been seen a decade earlier. A handful of loyal friends gathered alongside them, holding flickering candles that cast long shadows across the grass. Margaret had baked a chocolate cake, Emily's favorite, though no one had the heart to eat it. As Daniel spoke a few halting words about their enduring hope, Margaret noticed a figure standing at the edge of their property, partially obscured by the maple tree that had grown considerably since Emily's disappearance. The stranger, tall, with shoulders hunched against the evening chill, watched the proceedings with unsettling intensity. Margaret nudged her husband, but by the time Daniel turned to look, the figure had melted into the darkness. The homemaker felt a chill that had nothing to do with the autumn air. Who would watch a private family vigil from the shadows? Was it merely a curious neighbor, or someone with knowledge of what had happened to their daughter? That night, after their guests had departed with awkward hugs and well-meaning platitudes, Margaret stood at her kitchen window, staring into the darkness where the stranger had stood. The questions multiplied in her mind, adding new layers to the mystery that had consumed 10 years of their lives. The postcard arrived on a Tuesday, tucked between bills and advertisements. Margaret Granger nearly missed it among the stack of mail she'd collected from the box at the end of their driveway. It was plain, a generic landscape of mountains she didn't recognize, but when she flipped it over, her breath caught in her throat. 2 words, printed in careful block letters. Still here. No signature, no return address. Just those 2 words that sent a chill down her spine. "Daniel!" she called, her voice quavering. Her husband appeared from his home office, reading glasses perched on his nose. He'd been working from home more often lately, a concession to the growing distance between them. When he saw the postcard in her trembling hands, his expression shifted from annoyance to concern. "What is it?" he asked, taking the card and studying it. The professional man who had buried himself in work to escape their tragedy now looked as shaken as she felt. "Someone's playing a cruel joke," he finally said, but his voice lacked conviction. Margaret shook her head, taking back the postcard and tracing the letters with her fingertip. "This isn't a joke," she whispered. I think it might be about Emily." The police station felt colder than she remembered. Detective Harris, who had inherited Emily's case after the original investigator's retirement, examined the postcard with gloved hands, his expression neutral. "Mrs. Granger, I understand why you are concerned, but we receive dozens of tips and communications like this every year in missing persons cases," he explained, sliding the card into an evidence bag nonetheless. "Often they're from well-meaning people, sometimes from attention seekers." "But what if it's real?" Margaret pressed, leaning forward in her chair. "What if she's trying to reach out?" The detective's eyes softened. "We'll check for prints and analyze the handwriting, but I need to be honest. This is likely nothing." Later that evening, Margaret sat in Emily's untouched bedroom, the fading sunlight casting long shadows across the pink bedspread, and stuffed animals arranged just as they had been 11 years ago. She had retrieved the postcard from the police station after they'd processed it and found nothing useful. She opened the cedar chest at the foot of the bed where she kept Emily's most precious things: the blue dress from the party, a lock of baby hair, drawings from kindergarten. With reverent care, she placed the postcard among these treasures. "If you're still here," she whispered to the empty room, "we're still waiting." Daniel watched silently from the doorway, his silhouette a reminder of all they'd lost and all they still clung to. The fragile hope that somewhere, somehow their daughter might indeed still be here. Months later, Margaret Granger received an unsigned postcard in the mail bearing just 2 words: "Still here." The handwriting was unfamiliar, childlike yet deliberate, with letters that slanted slightly to the right. She stood frozen by the mailbox, her fingers trembling as they traced over the simple message that carried impossible weight. Daniel found her still clutching the card when he returned from work. "What is it?" he asked, his voice cutting through her trance. Margaret wordlessly handed him the postcard, watching as his expression shifted from confusion to a complex blend of hope and dread. "It could be from anyone," he said finally, though his voice lacked conviction. The couple spent the evening examining the card under every lamp in the house, searching for fingerprints, postmarks, any clue that might reveal its sender. The postmark showed it had been mailed from Cincinnati, just 2 hours away from their home outside Columbus. The next morning, Margaret called the detective who had handled Emily's case years before. Though officially retired, he agreed to look at the card as a courtesy. "Probably just some sicko who read about your daughter online," he said, barely glancing at the evidence before sliding it into a plastic bag. "We get these sometimes on cold cases. People who get a thrill from the pain of others." Police dismissed the postcard as a cruel prank, but Margaret was unconvinced. Something about those 2 simple words resonated with her maternal instinct. She remembered how Emily used to play hide and seek, whispering "still here," when Margaret would pretend she couldn't find her daughter hiding behind the curtains. That night, after Daniel had fallen asleep, Margaret sat alone in Emily's untouched bedroom. The walls were still the pale yellow they had painted together before the birthday party. Stuffed animals lined the shelves, frozen in time like everything else in this shrine to absence. She tucked the postcard away with Emily's belongings, sliding it between the pages of her daughter's favorite storybook. The words echoed in her mind as both threat and promise. Who would send such a message? Was it truly a random act of cruelty, or something more? Margaret ran her fingers over the book's worn cover, wondering if somewhere, somehow, her daughter might actually be still here, growing up, living a life, perhaps even remembering fragments of her true identity. As she finally left the room, closing the door gently behind her, Margaret couldn't shake the feeling that the postcard was not an end, but a beginning, the first real communication in a conversation 15 years in the making. The years continued to pass, and by 2013, the internet had become a haven for amateur sleuths. Emily's case resurfaced on forums and message boards, where strangers obsessed over every detail, spinning theories late into the night. Margaret Granger found herself scrolling through these discussions with mixed emotions. Hope mingled with the pain of seeing her daughter's story dissected by people who had never known Emily's laugh, or the way she'd twirl in her favorite blue dress. Daniel avoided these online communities entirely. "They're just reopening wounds," he told his wife one evening, his voice tight with the familiar strain that had become part of their marriage. He preferred to focus on his work trips, which had grown longer and more frequent over the years. The distance between them had become both physical and emotional, though neither could bring themselves to sever the bond that Emily's memory created. A new age progression photo was released that spring, showing what Emily might look like at 23. The image, created by forensic artists using the Granger's family photos and genetic predictions, sparked a fleeting wave of renewed interest. Local news stations ran the story on slow news days, and for a brief moment Emily's face was once again in the public consciousness. One woman in Kentucky claimed to recognize Emily from her workplace, a small cafe where she served as manager. The tip seemed promising. The woman described details about a quiet employee with almond-shaped eyes who kept to herself and never spoke about her childhood. Margaret's heart raced when the detective called with the news, but when investigators tracked down the lead, disappointment followed swiftly. The employee in question was revealed to be a distant cousin of a guest who had attended the birthday party years ago. She denied any involvement, showing records of her life that clearly proved she wasn't Emily. Another dead end, another disappointment that left Margaret staring at the ceiling late into the night. "I thought this one might be different," she confessed to her support group, women and men who nodded with understanding, born from similar experiences. They met monthly in the church basement, their numbers dwindling as some found closure, while others simply couldn't bear the weight of hope anymore. The Grangers' home, once filled with search volunteers and ringing phones, had grown quiet. Photos of Emily still adorned the walls, but they had become part of the background, like the fading wallpaper in the kitchen that Margaret couldn't bring herself to replace. Life continued in this strange limbo, not moving forward, not completely stuck, but suspended in a state of perpetual waiting that had become their normal. The Grangers learned to live with absence, never truly moving on but finding ways to keep hope alive. Their once bustling suburb began to change, storefronts emptying and families moving away, the passage of time evident in every quiet street. Margaret Granger tended her garden with the same care she'd shown 25 years ago, though her hands now bore the marks of age. The rhythms of her days had become predictable. Morning coffee, afternoon walks, and evenings spent in the living room where family photos still displayed Emily's 8-year-old smile. She'd never removed them, despite Daniel's occasional suggestion that perhaps they should update their home. "It's not about decorating," she would say quietly. "It's about remembering." Daniel had found refuge in his work, traveling more frequently as the years passed. The distance provided temporary relief from the empty bedroom down the hall, its contents preserved like a time capsule. When home, he retreated to his workshop, crafting wooden toys that would never be played with, a habit he couldn't explain, but couldn't abandon. Their marriage had weathered the storm of loss, though not without damage. They spoke less now, communicating through practiced routines and gentle accommodations. The blame they'd once hurled at each other had mellowed into a shared, silent understanding that some wounds never fully heal. The support group Margaret had joined years ago had dwindled to just 3 members who still met monthly at the church. They spoke of their missing children as if they might walk through the door at any moment, using present tense even after decades. No one corrected this hopeful grammar. Around them, the neighborhood transformed. The woods where search teams had once combed for evidence were now partially cleared for a housing development. The corner store, where Emily's flyer had hung for years, closed down, replaced by a chain pharmacy. Even the elementary school had been renovated beyond recognition, erasing the physical landmarks of their memories. Yet in this changing landscape, the Grangers remained, anchored by possibility. Every Christmas, Margaret hung a stocking with Emily's name. Every birthday, she baked a chocolate cake, Emily's favorite, and left a slice on the porch overnight, a ritual that concerned neighbors had long stopped questioning. "She might come home," Margaret would tell the young couple who moved in next door. They would nod politely, too young to remember the case that had once captivated the nation. Emily's memory lingered in photographs and in the hearts of those who refused to forget. A ghost story to the neighborhood children, a cautionary tale to parents, and to Margaret and Daniel, an unfinished chapter waiting for its ending. Spring of 2023 brought an unexpected jolt to the Granger household. Margaret Granger, now retired after decades of working while maintaining her search, spent her mornings browsing the internet with idle curiosity. Her morning ritual included checking news sites, missing persons forums, and occasionally searching Emily's name, a habit she couldn't break even after 25 years. On a whim, she visited the website of a local high school, scrolling through faculty photos without any real expectation. It was just another stone to turn over in her endless search. The screen flickered as images loaded, faces of strangers passing before her tired eyes. Suddenly, a face stopped her cold. Under assistant librarian was a woman whose features mirrored Emily's, the same almond-shaped eyes, the familiar tilt of her head, even the slight dimple in her right cheek when she smiled. Margaret's hands trembled as she zoomed in on the image, her coffee forgotten beside her computer. "Daniel," she called, her voice cracking. "Daniel, come here." Her husband appeared in the doorway, concern etched on his weathered face. The years had not been kind to Daniel Granger. His hair had grayed prematurely, and deep lines marked his once youthful features. He approached cautiously, having learned to temper his expectations after countless false alarms. "Look at this," Margaret whispered, pointing at the screen. "Tell me I'm not imagining things." Daniel leaned closer, squinting at the image. His breath caught as recognition dawned. The resemblance was uncanny, like looking at an adult version of the age progression photos they'd commissioned over the years. "It could be a coincidence," he said softly, but his voice lacked conviction. Margaret shook her head. The age would be right. And look at her eyes, Daniel. Those are your eyes. They sat in silence, staring at the photograph of Anna Whitmore, both afraid to voice the hope blooming in their chests. After so many disappointments, so many leads that led nowhere, could this finally be their daughter? "We need to be careful," Daniel warned, placing a steadying hand on his wife's shoulder. "We can't just show up there. If it is her." He couldn't finish the sentence. Margaret nodded, understanding his caution. If this woman was truly Emily, approaching her directly might frighten her away. They needed more information before taking any steps. "I'll email the school," she decided, already composing the message in her mind. "Just asking about their staff. Nothing suspicious." As Daniel returned to his workshop, Margaret remained transfixed by the image on her screen, unable to look away from the face that had haunted her dreams for 25 years. Daniel Granger couldn't sleep after seeing Anna Whitmore's photo. The possibility that this woman might be his long-lost daughter consumed his every thought. After 25 years of heartache, the stoic father who had buried himself in work to escape his pain now found himself driving to the high school with a toolbox in hand. "I'm here about the electrical work," he told the front office receptionist, his voice steadier than his hands. The school administration had readily accepted his offer to inspect some faulty wiring in the library, a convenient excuse he'd arranged through a contractor friend. As he walked the polished hallways, Daniel's eyes scanned every doorway and corridor. The building buzzed with teenage energy, students rushing between classes, their laughter and chatter a stark contrast to the weight of his mission. He found himself wondering if Emily would have attended a school like this. What subjects she might have loved, whether she would have played sports or joined the debate team. The library stood at the end of the east wing, its double doors propped open. Daniel paused at the entrance, pretending to examine a light fixture while his gaze swept the room. Several students huddled around tables. A librarian shelved books near the reference section, but there was no sign of Anna. "Can I help you?" A young teacher approached, clipboard in hand. "Just checking the wiring," Daniel replied, gesturing vaguely toward the ceiling. "I was told to look at the circulation desk area." The teacher nodded and pointed toward the back of the library. Daniel thanked her and moved deeper into the space, his heart hammering against his ribs. And then he saw her. Anna Whitmore stood behind the circulation desk, her chestnut hair pulled back in a loose ponytail. She was helping a student locate a book, her movements precise and confident. Daniel froze, overwhelmed by how much she resembled Margaret. The same graceful gestures, the same way of tilting her head slightly when listening. He approached slowly, pretending to examine the light fixtures above the desk. When Anna looked up, their eyes met briefly. Something flickered across her face. Confusion, recognition, fear. Whatever the emotion, it vanished instantly as she quickly looked away, returning her attention to the student before her. Daniel fumbled with his tools, stealing glances at the assistant librarian. The lump in his throat made it difficult to breathe. This woman, who might be his Emily, showed no sign of recognizing him, yet something in that fleeting look had stirred both hope and dread in his heart. He left the library an hour later, having accomplished nothing with the wiring but everything in his quest. Daniel sat in his vehicle, hands trembling on the steering wheel. He needed to tell Margaret what he'd seen, but the words wouldn't come easily. Their daughter might be alive, but the girl they'd lost seemed gone forever. Daniel Granger paced the empty hallways of the high school, his heart hammering against his ribs. The electrical work he'd volunteered for was merely a pretext, a desperate father's ploy to catch a glimpse of the woman who might be his long-lost daughter. 25 years of searching had led to this moment, and his hands trembled as he adjusted his tool belt. When Anna Whitmore finally emerged from the library, time seemed to slow. She walked with purpose, her arms full of books, completely unaware of the man whose life had been shattered the day she disappeared. Daniel froze, studying her features, the same almond-shaped eyes that had once looked up at him with childish wonder, the familiar tilt of her head as she considered something. Everything about her screamed Emily, but nothing in her demeanor suggested she recognized him. Their eyes met briefly in the corridor. Anna offered a polite, professional nod, the kind reserved for maintenance, staff, before quickly averting her gaze. In that fleeting moment, Daniel thought he detected something. A flicker of emotion, perhaps unease or confusion, but it vanished so quickly, he couldn't be certain. The assistant librarian continued down the hallway, leaving him rooted to the spot, breathless with both hope and heartache. It was then that Daniel noticed it, the small gold locket hanging from a delicate chain around her neck. His vision blurred as recognition hit him like a physical blow. The jewelry was identical to the one they had given Emily on her 8th birthday, just months before she vanished. He even caught a glimpse of the elegant E engraved on its surface as she turned the corner. That night Daniel could barely speak as he described the encounter to Margaret. "It's her," he whispered, his voice breaking. "The locket. It's the same one. No one else could have it." Margaret clutched his hands, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and desperate hope. "We can't just confront her," she said after a long silence. "If it really is Emily, who knows what she's been through, what she's been told? We could scare her away forever." The couple realized they needed professional help, someone who could discreetly investigate without alerting Anna, or whoever might still be protecting her. After careful consideration, they contacted a local journalist known for her investigative work and compassion in sensitive cases. "Officials failed us for 25 years, Margaret told Daniel as they prepared for their meeting with the reporter. "Maybe someone outside the system can finally help us find the truth." Daniel nodded, the image of the locket burning in his mind. After decades of false leads and disappointments, he finally felt certain. The woman working in that library was their daughter, Emily, and nothing would stop them from uncovering what had happened all those years ago. The journalist, a seasoned investigator with a knack for uncovering hidden truths, spent weeks methodically piecing together Anna Whitmore's past. What emerged was troubling, a life defined by impermanence. She had moved 7 times in 15 years, crossing state lines and leaving minimal paper trails with each relocation. Credit histories, rental agreements, and employment records all showed the same pattern. Anna appeared suddenly in communities, integrated quietly, then vanished without explanation. "It's like watching someone constantly erase their footprints," the journalist explained to Margaret and Daniel Granger in their living room. The couple listened intently, hope and dread intermingling as they absorbed each revelation. The most telling discovery came when the journalist tracked Anna's employment history. Her position at the local high school library had begun only 2 years earlier, with references that checked out but seemed curiously vague. Prior jobs showed similar patterns, short-term positions with just enough documentation to appear legitimate. "What about before?" Margaret asked, her fingers nervously tracing the rim of her coffee cup. The journalist shook her head. "That's where things get interesting. I can't find verifiable records before 15 years ago. It's as if Anna Whitmore simply materialized as a teenager." Daniel leaned forward, his normally stoic demeanor cracking. Could someone have deliberately hidden her past? "That's exactly what I believe happened," the journalist confirmed, pulling out a folder. "I found adoption papers filed in Tennessee, dated 3 months after Emily disappeared. The child's name was listed as Jane, later legally changed to Anna. The adoptive parents' names were redacted, but the timing is impossible to ignore." Margaret's hands trembled as she examined the photocopied documents. "Someone created an entirely new person," she whispered. "The paperwork appears legitimate at first glance," the journalist continued. "But when I cross-referenced with state records, inconsistencies emerged. Whoever arranged this knew exactly how to navigate the system, creating just enough documentation to establish a legal identity while obscuring the child's origins. Daniel paced the room, processing the implications. So someone took our daughter, gave her a new name, new parents, a completely fabricated history, and moved her frequently enough that no one would connect the dots, the journalist added. It's sophisticated, deliberate, and frankly, disturbing. Margaret stared at Anna's employee photo, searching for the 8-year-old girl she'd lost. Do you think she knows about any of this? The journalist hesitated. That's what we need to find out. But we need to proceed carefully. If Anna is Emily, approaching her directly could frighten her away forever. The Grangers exchanged glances, 25 years of uncertainty culminating in this moment. The truth was within reach, but the path forward remained fraught with risk. Margaret Granger clutched the worn photograph in her trembling hands as she waited outside the high school library. 25 years of uncertainty had led to this moment. Her heart pounded against her ribs when she spotted Anna Whitmore emerging from the double doors, arms full of books. "Excuse me," Margaret called softly, her voice barely audible above the distant chatter of students. The younger woman turned, her almond-shaped eyes, so hauntingly familiar, widening slightly at the unexpected interruption. "Can I help you?" Anna asked, shifting the books in her arms. The locket with the engraved E glinted at her throat, catching the afternoon light. Margaret stepped forward, summoning every ounce of courage. "I'm sorry to bother you, but I wonder if you might recognize this." She extended the photograph, a snapshot of 8-year-old Emily in her sky-blue dress, taken the morning of the birthday party. The assistant librarian's face transformed as she stared at the image. Color drained from her cheeks, her composure visibly crumbling. The books in her arms seemed suddenly heavy, her knuckles whitening as she gripped them tighter. "I don't," Anna began, but her voice caught. Something flickered across her features. Confusion, recognition, fear, a cascade of emotions impossible to untangle. Margaret watched intently, searching for any confirmation in those familiar eyes. "Her name was Emily," she whispered. "She disappeared 25 years ago." Anna took a small step backward, her gaze darting between the photograph and Margaret's hopeful face. For one breathless moment it seemed she might say something crucial, something that would bridge the chasm of lost years. Instead, she abruptly handed the photograph back. "I'm sorry," she murmured, her voice strained. "I have an appointment. I need to go." Without another word, she turned and hurried down the hallway, her footsteps echoing against the linoleum. Margaret stood frozen, the photograph limp in her hand. Had she imagined that flash of recognition, the momentary panic in Anna's eyes? That evening, Margaret and Daniel sat at their kitchen table, dissecting every second of the encounter. "You should have waited for me," Daniel said, running his hands through his graying hair. "We agreed to approach her together." "I couldn't wait another day," Margaret replied. "You didn't see her face, Daniel." She recognized something in that photo. They debated their next move for hours, fear gnawing at them both. What if Anna disappeared again? What if this confrontation drove her away permanently? "We've come too far to lose her now," Daniel whispered, reaching for his wife's hand across the table. Margaret nodded, squeezing his fingers. 25 years, Daniel. If that's really our Emily, we can't let her slip away again. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to the channel and comment where you're watching from. 3 days passed with no sign of Anna Whitmore at the high school. Her desk sat untouched, books stacked neatly as if awaiting her return. The principal called her cell phone repeatedly, but each attempt went straight to voicemail. By the 4th day, concern had turned to alarm, and the school staff decided to check her office more thoroughly. It was the young janitor who found it, a cream-colored envelope propped against her computer monitor. Inside was a single sheet of paper, the handwriting flowing in distinctive loops and curves. The principal read it first, then immediately called Margaret Granger. "I don't know who I was, but I know who I am now. Please let me be." When Margaret saw the letter, her hands trembled uncontrollably. She recognized those loops and swirls immediately, the same handwriting that had filled birthday cards and school assignments 25 years earlier. Daniel stood beside her, his face ashen, as he compared the letter to one of Emily's childhood diary pages they had preserved. "It's her," he whispered, voice breaking. "It's really her." News spread quickly through the small community. Teachers who had worked alongside Anna for 2 years struggled to reconcile the quiet librarian with the missing girl whose story had become local legend. Some expressed skepticism, suggesting the Grangers were seeing what they desperately wanted to see. Others whispered about elaborate hoaxes or cases of mistaken identity. "The resemblance could be coincidence," said one math teacher during lunch, "and handwriting can be similar without being the same person." But Margaret knew better. She sat in her kitchen that evening, the letter and a photograph of 8-year-old Emily side by side on the table. Daniel paced the room, alternating between hope and despair. "What if she never comes back?" he asked, voicing their shared fear. "What if we've scared her away forever?" Margaret touched the letter gently. "She's confused, Daniel. Whoever took her, whoever raised her, they've built her entire identity on lies." The couple contacted the journalist who had been helping them, sharing this new development. He advised caution, warning that approaching Anna too aggressively might drive her further away. The Grangers found themselves suspended in an agonizing limbo, having found their daughter only to lose her again. That night, Margaret stood at the window, watching headlights pass on the street below. Somewhere out there was Emily, a woman who called herself Anna, who had no memory of her true beginnings, who was now running from a past she couldn't remember, and a family she didn't know. "Come back," Margaret whispered to the darkness. "Just give us a chance." The silence stretched for 3 agonizing days after Anna's abrupt departure. Margaret Granger checked her phone obsessively while Daniel paced their living room, both paralyzed by the fear they had pushed too hard, too fast. The school administration had no answers. Anna Whitmore had simply failed to return to work without explanation. On the 4th day, the high school principal called Margaret. "There's something you should see," he said, his voice carefully neutral. "We found a letter in her office." The Grangers arrived within the hour. The small office smelled of dust and faint perfume, abandoned mid-task with books still stacked on the desk. The principal handed them an envelope, unmarked and unsealed. Inside was a single sheet of paper with a message that made Margaret's knees buckle. "I don't know who I was, but I know who I am now. Please let me be." Daniel steadied his wife as she traced the loops and curves of the handwriting. The script was hauntingly familiar, the same distinctive way of crossing T's and curling G's that appeared in Emily's childhood diaries, preserved like relics in their home for 25 years. "It's her," Margaret whispered, tears streaming down her face. "It's really her." Word spread quickly through the small community. Former neighbors who had helped search the woods in 1998 now debated theories over coffee. Some believed Anna was truly the missing Granger child, while others suspected an elaborate hoax. A few cruel voices suggested the assistant librarian might be exploiting a grieving family's desperation. "We need proof," Daniel insisted that evening, his protective instincts finally overriding his caution. "Something definitive." The journalist they had enlisted examined the letter, comparing it to Emily's childhood valentines and birthday cards. "The resemblance is striking," she admitted, "but handwriting analysis isn't conclusive. We need DNA." Their opportunity came unexpectedly through a teaching assistant who had befriended Anna during her time at the school. "I still have her coffee mug," she told the Grangers. "She never came back for it." The DNA sample, collected discreetly and compared against the Grangers, left the family suspended between hope and heartbreak. Margaret found herself praying for contradictory outcomes, confirmation that would end their search, yet fearing what that truth might mean for the woman who had built a life as Anna Whitmore. The Grangers waited, caught in the limbo between knowing and not knowing, between finding their daughter and losing her all over again. The letter remained on their kitchen table, its message both plea and confession, the handwriting a ghost from their past reaching into the present. The DNA test results arrived in a plain, manila envelope, delivered to Margaret Granger's trembling hands. After 25 years of uncertainty, science had confirmed what her heart already knew. Anna Whitmore was indeed Emily Granger. Margaret clutched the paper to her chest, tears streaming down her face as Daniel wrapped his arms around her shoulders, his stoic facade finally crumbling. The confirmation was bittersweet, a resolution that only deepened the mystery of all Emily had lost. Through careful intermediaries, they arranged their first meeting at a quiet cafe halfway between their homes. Margaret arrived an hour early, nervously rearranging sugar packets while Daniel paced outside, smoking cigarettes he'd quit decades ago. When Emily walked through the door, the resemblance to the age progression photos was striking, yet nothing prepared them for seeing their daughter in the flesh. She moved with a cautious grace, her almond-shaped eyes, so like Margaret's, scanning the room before settling on her biological parents. "I don't remember you," were her first words, delivered not unkindly, but with the directness of someone who had spent years constructing her identity from fragments. "I don't remember anything before I was 9. Over coffee that grew cold, Emily confessed that her earliest memories were of strangers who became her family, a new name, new school, and carefully constructed life. The people who raised her had convinced her that her story began at 9 years old, following what they called a traumatic accident that explained her memory loss. "They told me looking backward would only hurt me," she explained, twisting the locket with the engraved E between her fingers. "I never questioned why this was the only thing I had from before." The Grangers listened, hearts breaking anew with each revelation. The family who had raised Emily had moved frequently, changing schools and neighborhoods whenever questions arose. They had died in a car accident 5 years ago, taking their secrets to the grave and leaving Emily, Anna, alone with an identity built on shifting sand. "I built a life," she said firmly. "I have friends, colleagues, a career I love. I don't know if I can be Emily again." Margaret reached across the table but stopped short of touching her daughter's hand. "We don't expect you to be someone you don't remember being," she whispered. "We just want to know you, however you choose to be known." Their reunion remained tentative, limited to carefully managed visits that respected the boundaries Emily established. For the Grangers, relief mingled with grief as they navigated this new relationship, not the joyful homecoming they had imagined, but a fragile connection they treasured, nonetheless. The mystery of who had taken Emily and why remained unsolved. The retired detective's involvement, the white station wagon, the balloon in the woods, all pieces of a puzzle that might never be completed, but for now finding their daughter alive was enough.